You may be seated. The moment of death is something that we all know is inevitable. It is a time where, on one level, we can try and prepare ourselves for it, and here, where Harriet had been ill for such an extended period, especially over these last 6 months, we knew that this day would come. We didn't know when. And yet, even with all of that knowledge, when it does arrive, there's still always a shocking aspect to it, and the grief that we feel at that moment. Harriet lived a remarkable, storied life, nearly 95 years. And she lived her life as she wanted to. Through so much of that time. And so there is what to celebrate today as well, in being able to have accomplished the things that she did in times that were difficult, to be able to do them. And that is especially true of the career path that she took as not just a nurse, but one of the first to go through the BA program at University of Connecticut, nursing program, and then to pursue the specialty in psychiatric nursing and the career that she led with that. We want to honor her career in nursing and are pleased to have with us today some members from the Maryland Nursing Association Honor Guard who will pay tribute to Harriet's life and career as a nurse.
The Maryland Nurse Honor Guard is privileged to present the ceremonial tribute in honor of Harriet Armoza, RN. Harriet, we honor you this day in appreciation for being our nurse colleague. Nursing is a passion, a calling, and a way of living. Nurses here today honor our colleague Harriet and her life as a nurse. Harriet is not only remembered by her many years as a nurse, but by the difference she made during those years, stepping into people's lives by special moments. Harriet was there when a calming, quiet presence was all that was needed. Harriet was there in the excitement of miracle of birth or in the mystery of loss of life. Harriet was there when a silent glance could uplift a patient, a family member, or a friend. Harriet was there at those times when the unexplainable needed to be explained. Harriet was there when the situation demanded a swift foot and a sharp mind, Harriet was there. When a gentle touch, a firm push, or an encouraging word was needed, Harriet was there. When a mentor or a leader was needed, Harriet was there. To witness humanity, its beauty in good times and bad, but without judgment, Harriet was there. To embrace the woes of the world willingly and offer hope, Harriet was there. And now that it's time to be at the greater one side, Harriet is there. We invite any nurses here today to please stand if you are able, remain standing, or raise your hand in honor and recognition of Harriet Armoza, RN. Harriet, we honor you this day with a white rose. The rose symbolizes all that nursing stands for: hope, comfort, kindness, gentleness, respect, and devotion. We present this rose in appreciation for being our beloved colleague. You may be seated. Thank you. Now we will have Harriet's last call to duty. Harriet Armoza, please report to duty. Harriet Armoza, please report to duty. Harriet Armoza, please report to duty. Harriet Armoza, RN, we officially release you of your nursing duties. Although your nursing tasks are complete, they will never be forgotten. Thank you for your service, and your colleagues will take it from here. This nursing lamp symbolizes a nurse's lifetime commitment to knowledge and care for others. The lamp is lit at the beginning of a nurse's career, and the candle is extinguished when their service is completed. At this time, we present Harriet's family with the Florence Nightingale lamp. On behalf of the Maryland Nurse Honor Guard, we offer our condolences to you all. It has been our privilege to express our respect and gratitude to Harriet for the care that she gave for others. Thank you for allowing us to honor her and her nursing career.
I want to thank Nurse Carol and the other members of the Maryland Nursing Association Honor Guard for paying such beautiful tribute to Harriet. As we heard from Elaine, so many of the words there spoke so true. And I would also note, having seen Harriet at the Landau House in those final weeks, as she had cared for others, so too there was a team of nurses who cared with her, who cared for her, protecting her dignity and always trying to ensure that she was receiving the best care possible. So we thank those nurses as well, and all those in the nursing profession. For Harriet and Jacob, Jewish community was so central to their lives, and that means that they are remembered and honored not just in one community, but by multiple Jewish communities, especially that of Or Kodesh as well, where David and Sarah and Avi and Talia and Anna have not only had it as their home, but literally their front yard for many, many years. And we're pleased that Rabbi Corey Helfand from Or Kodesh is here and will share a few words and the words from Psalm 15.
The words of Psalm 121. Shir lamalot esayin ayalarim ayin yavo Ezri. Ezri meim Adonai oseh shamayim v'aretz al yiten lamot raglecha al yanum shomrecha. Hine lo yanum lo yishan shomer Yisrael. Adonai shomerecha, Adonai tzilcha, al yad yaminecha. Yomam hashemesh lo yakeka, ve'yareach balayla. Adonai yishmorcha mikora, yishmor et nafshecha. Adonai yishmor et tzeitecha uvoecha, me'ata ve'ad olam. A song for ascents. I turn my eyes to the mountains, from where will my help come? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. Adonai will not let your foot give way. Your guardian will not slumber. The guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai is your protection, a guardian at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all harm and guard your life. Adonai guards your going and your coming, now and forever.
In the words of Psalm 23, Mizmor leDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar, Bino deshe yahar b'tzeini, al mei menucho yinahaleni, nafshi yeshovev, nafshi yeshovev, Yancheni b'magle tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech begeit al maveh. Lo irara ki ata imadi. Shiftecha umishantecha, Shiftecha umishantecha, Hema yenachamuni, Taharok lefanai shulchan, Neged torerai, Di shanta Vashem in roshi, Kosi revaya. Achtov, Achtov v'chesed, Yirdefuni, Kol yemei chayai, V'shai V'shavti, v'shavti b'veit Adonai. V'shavti b'veit Adonai le'orech yamim. A psalm of David. Adonai is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me to lie down in green pastures and leads me beside still waters. God restores my soul, guides me in straight paths for God's name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I now want to call upon David Armoza, Harriet's son, to deliver some words of eulogy.
I want to thank you all for being here to support me and my family in this difficult transition. It was a long time coming, unfortunately. My mom had a long life. She was the third child of Harriet and Anna Feimark. She was born in a small gray two-story wood house in New Haven, Connecticut. And she was born during the height of the Great Depression in the beginning of 1931. I have lots of good memories of visiting my Saba Harry and my Sabta Anna, where they lived on the first floor of Rosette Street. They shared the house with my Saba Harry's older sisters, Aunt Sarah and Aunt Lottie. They lived there on the second floor. There was also Uncle Joe's family in Woodmont and Aunt Rita's family in Hamden. My mom, she made sure that we visited New Haven frequently. Many years of driving up and down 95 to Connecticut in good weather and sometimes really bad weather, making our way up to Connecticut so that we could be there with our extended family. My grandparents used to come and visit and stay with us for several years before their health started declining. And I have some good memories of Saba Harry and Sabta Anna being down in the basement and getting a chance to sort of fatten up my Saba Harry, since he was a very thin man. He enjoyed the food that we were able to give them, and it was good that we had that extended time. I was the youngest of my cousins, my generation, so it was a little bit of a different experience. My grandfather gave a lot of attention to me, and he really enjoyed being there in our house. And it was a blessing to have, that sort of continuance. My mom made sure that we could be there with our family and to, always experience, the high times and the low times together, and know that we came from the same place. There's a number of stories about my mom. Some of them are appropriate for this setting, and some of them are not. One of the ones that I thought would be kind of nice to talk about was that she has a nickname. Some of you know it, and other people don't. In 1931, she was a baby. Her parents were visiting the elder Feimarks in Fairhaven. and baby Harriet was sitting in her mom's lap. And my Aunt Lottie came over and pinched her niece's plump cheeks and said, "What a cookie. I could eat you up." And somehow the name stuck, and the family and friends called her Cookie. Much to the confusion of some people who just knew her as Harriet, because there was always that sort of confusion there. Another story from that time was when she was sleeping in a crib in her parents' bedroom, but in December of 1932, she was moved to another part of the house. And then later, on the 16th, someone was welcomed into the house and brought into a makeshift bassinet in the dresser. And my mother Harriet was brought back to her crib, but she didn't want to settle down. She wanted to know what was going on. So she stood up and she began to yell, "Hold ya, hold ya." And so my Saba Harry couldn't get her to quiet down, so finally she brought over the newborn baby Elaine and helped my mother hold her new sister for a few minutes, and then she quieted down and was able to go to sleep. This was an auspicious beginning to what led to my mom, Harriet, and Elaine developing a very close relationship, almost like they were twins. They were constant companions throughout their formative years, and that continued into the later years when my mother and father moved down to this area, the Silver Spring area, in the early 1960s. So they could be where my Aunt Elaine and Uncle Micah were living. There was much going back and forth between Mapleview Drive, where we lived, Kramer Street, those years. Spent a lot of time visiting with my Tante Elaine and Uncle Micah. And in particular, I spent a lot of time with my Tante Elaine and my Tante Riri up in Connecticut. They were kind of like my extra moms. I learned a lot of things from being with Tante Elaine, baking for one thing. And then I also learned about being on a golf course from being with Tante Riri. So that was a very formative part of my life, that my parents were able to have a close relationship with those sisters, and that I could then spend time and learn things from them. My mother had very bad myopia when she was an early age. She always referred to it as the Weimar curse. I got lucky and didn't get the full-blown version of it, but her vision was bad enough that she was considered actually visually disabled in her school system, so she actually was in special education program, but she, regardless, was able to graduate with honors from New Haven High School in 1948. She went on then to become a nurse at Mount Sinai's Hospital of School Nursing in New York City, which was a 3-year hospital-based nursing education. My mom explained multiple times it was kind of like an apprenticeship. Normally, the nursing program would be 1 year of intense study, and then you would transition, but you would have to have, practica or something like that. But for her case, it was more working really hard and having to deal with the doctors who at that time were very, into being the leaders of the community, and nurses were basically the go-to people. I got the impression from my mom that that kind of way that they treated nurses back then was not as fulfilling for her, in the sense of, being on the front lines, even though she was proud of her capabilities, and she told several stories of some of the crazier adventures she had on the night shift. I distinctly remember the time when she had to deal with a patient whose stitches had opened up and parts were coming out, and helping get that all under control again. Kind of a harrowing story, but she managed to, sort of laugh it off, saying, well, that was kind of what it was. We had to do that. She was very goal-oriented, but she wanted more agency in terms of how she was doing things. So that led her to go to get a bachelor's degree at University of Connecticut in 1955 in psychiatric nursing. It was one of the earliest programs that were offering that type of nursing degree. After she graduated from UConn, she decided she wanted to travel to Israel and Europe, where her plan was to leverage her new shiny and relatively rare degree in nursing into an opportunity to explore the Holy Land and learn Hebrew, and then travel in Europe. As I understand it, I was going to build up enough savings for her travel from her time in, as a nurse when she was in Israel, and then travel to Europe, and then go home. At the time, it wasn't easy to get to Israel. So she came up with a plan going on a third-class ticket on an Israeli ship of the Zim line. That was basically how you got around pretty much most of the time, because flying was very, very expensive and very hard to do. Her parents and her brother took her down to the port, and they saw the ship, and they were not happy. It was a very rough and tumble kind of ship, but she stuck to her horses and said, I'm not changing my plans, I'm going. So she got aboard the ship, and she was 2 weeks transiting from New York City to Haifa. It was an adventure for her. She said, I remember her saying, there was a lot of good kosher food because a lot of the passengers were not eating. So she eventually arrived in Haifa, made her way to Jerusalem. She enrolled in an intensive Hebrew language program. So she wanted to learn to be able to, get around and talk to people. After that program, she traveled around southern Israel on the Israeli bus line Egged. So she made a friend during her language immersion program, and they traveled around and eventually found their way down to Eilat, where my mom met the man who would become my father, Jacob Armoza. He was part of a local fisherman cooperative there, and from what I understand, he was the reason they were successful. The other person was kind of riding on my father's coattails a little bit. My family knows this story, but during their first meeting, Jacob told Harriet he was going to marry her. And my mom, as she told the story, rolled her eyes and said, what is with this crazy guy? But when he asked for her address in Jerusalem, she gave it. So there was, I guess, enough of an attraction there that she was willing to accept it. After she finished with her sightseeing tour, she went back to Jerusalem. She was hired as a psychiatric nurse at the Hadassah's hospital psychiatric unit. It was in a Quonset hut at the time. It did not have heating during the winter, and she had to dress like it was working outdoors, even though she was inside. She did that for a year, and as typical for my mom, she wanted to learn Hebrew. So even though the people wanted to talk to her in English, she only wanted to talk in Hebrew. But it helped her get a good foundation in talking in Hebrew. During that same year, Jacob would regularly fly up from Eilat to court my mom. He wore her down, and he married in September of 1956. Apparently, they had to get a letter from an Orthodox rabbi back in the States to attest that my mom was kosher enough to be married to an Israeli Jew. Fortunately, there was a rabbi at my great-grandparents' Orthodox synagogue who vouched for her. So the rabbinate basically signed off on letting them marry. Marriage in Israel is a little more complicated in terms of the ways they do things there, but that worked out. And then they moved to Eilat after getting married, and they stayed there for 2 nights until at the middle of the night there was a knock on the door, and my father was told he had to go join his brigade because that was getting ready for the start for the Sinai War. So their honeymoon was kind of interrupted, and he was gone for about a week during that time. Everything was shut down in Eilat, and their close proximity to Jordan's Aqaba made Eilat a very scary place. Eilat was kind of a hard place to live. It wasn't a fancy resort as it is nowadays. They were living in pretty rough conditions, limited potable water, really hot temperatures during the day. And there wasn't very much for my mom to do there. So they eventually compromised on moving back to Jerusalem. Thought, well, my father will be able to find a job because he was very good at finding things. But they didn't have luck with that. She was able to get a job back at the Hadassah Hospital, but my father couldn't find anything. For those who know about the history, the United States was not very happy with Israel about the Sinai War. And they had some punishing economic sanctions. So they were in a depression then, and they couldn't survive off of one salary. So my mom said, I'm going back to the United States. You should come too. That worked for my mom because she was a U.S. citizen, and she got back in 1957, but it took a year and a half for my father's paperwork to find its way through the system. I remember a story, sort of funny. My mom and her family went to go greet my father when he was coming in from Israel. And he exited the plane carrying a baby that he had transported to the U.S. because he had volunteered, because he knew how to take care of babies. So he volunteered to take care of the baby. And so he came out of the plane and he saw them. He was waving, holding the baby. And needless to say, my mother's family looked at her very questioningly. So that was a funny situation. But he had a perfectly good explanation for it. Why is this a problem? So once they got there, all together, they were in New Haven for about a year, living close to my Aunt Rita. And then they moved down to Silver Spring, Maryland, to be close to my Tante Lane and Uncle Micah. In the early 60s, my mom worked as a staff community health nurse in Montgomery County. She liked the freedom that she had in the role, allowed her to be involved in the health education of her clients. Funny story from that is that they told her that she would be in the office, but that she might have to drive out to clients. My mom didn't know how to drive, but she didn't tell them that. So she came home and told my father, Jacob, you need to teach me how to drive. He did. It was probably a bit more exciting than just that way of saying it, because my father wasn't a great teacher. He was great at getting things done. So when it came time for me to learn how to drive, my mother asked my Aunt Elaine to help. So that worked out well for me, and I think it was a good experience. I learned good habits from her, but I also learned some of the tricks of driving from him. So in 1962, my mom took a break from the nursing. She wanted to get a Master's of Science in Psychiatric Nursing from Catholic University. It took a little bit longer because 1962 and then 1963 kind of rolled around, and then that's kind of when I came on the scene. So she had to take a little bit of a break before she could go back to finish her degree. but she did. Then after that, she took on various nursing roles with Prince George's County or Washington, D.C. She was a staff nurse, a supervisory nurse, a psychiatric nurse, a visiting nurse, which made good use of her new driving skills. She enjoyed the challenges that her career presented her. And she also made some lifelong friendships with several of her peers from working together at that time. There'd be many times when there would be parties where David had to go to bed early because she was entertaining her friends downstairs in the basement. I always wondered what was going on, but it sounded like they were having a good time. In 1976, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer for the first time. She had to argue with the doctor about getting a radical mastectomy for her left breast. She told the doctor that was the treatment she needed to get from him. He didn't want to do that, but he ended up going along with that. It ended up being a correct decision because my mom had been cancer-free from then until 2010. I'm glad she was more assertive since one of my schoolmates at the time also had a mother who went through that, and they didn't pursue aggressive treatment, and he lost his mother. So that was kind of a strong motivator to say, you know, when you have a medical condition, you take care of it and you be sure that you know what you're doing, instead of just letting the doctor say it'll be okay. So this plan worked. So my mom decided after getting the cancer she would retire because she figured going back and having to work and stuff like that would be too much stress, and she didn't want the breast cancer to come back. And that worked for about 10 years. Then my father hurt himself, and he had the bad luck of working for basically a dishonest employer who ended up fighting for my father to get workman's compensation. Money was very tight for us for several years, but my mom worked really hard to figure out how to keep us afloat. And we got help from family, from friends. It was a defining characteristic of my childhood, you know, going through that. But I didn't notice it as much during the time because she kept things going, which was one of the things that she was really good at. When she decided she needed to take care of things, she had a plan for it. Usually she did a pretty good job with that. Not always, but usually she did. So she went back to work because my father couldn't. And then she continued working until her retirement in 1985. No, sorry, she started in 1985. She stopped in around 1995. She worked in the state of Maryland as a mental health therapist. In 2001, my parents sold their house on Mapleview Drive to move to Homecrest. The Homecrest house was run by the B'nai B'rith. At the time, it was a lot more Jewish residents there, and it was very comfortable. They had kosher dining services. They were very happy there. They seemed to get along with the people there, and it gave them the ability to travel, which is something that they had really wanted to do. They went on many trips that they couldn't afford before, going to Australia, Argentina, many places around the US. I remember many stories about going on elder hostels with Tante Riri and Uncle Micah and Tante Lane, going to places with other friends too, seeing things and learning about things. You know, third hand, I would learn about them. She developed a big love of glass during that time and ended up starting a collection of glassware from different places. I remember a trip all the way up to Corning, New York, because of that, where we went to learn how they were making glass and seeing the glass museum that they had there. It was all because my mom really wanted to see what they had there. It was a very good experience, and it was fun, but there was a lot of glass that she had in her apartment. I had to figure out how to get it all out of there. So they enjoyed their time at Homecrest, but things got harder in 2019 when my dad passed. She insisted that she wanted to stay there until she really couldn't manage anymore. And I was able to get her into the Hebrew home these last months. Even though she didn't enjoy that time, I knew that she was grateful that she had a safe place that was a Jewish place, that she could know that she would get the care from people who knew what she needed. Being Jewish was very important to my mom. She was very focused on it from an early age. She was actually kind of a little bit of an outlier for the 5 marks in the way that she pursued it. And afterwards, when they were in Homecrest, they spent a lot of time here at this congregation being members and having a well-rounded, relationship with the people here as a minion that they would be involved with. So I'm glad that she had a safe place to end her life with us here on earth. I'm very grateful and thankful for the help that the Hebrew home and the nurses there gave to her. It gave me a sense of relief and satisfaction that she was being guided to where she needs to be. Especially grateful that my Aunt Elaine was able to share with being in that. Her sister and her lifelong friend was able to be there and not have to worry about how she was going to leave us. But now she has, and she's now back with her life mate, and I will pray that everything is good for her as God will will it. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for those beautiful and heartfelt words. You covered so much of her life. I want to just focus on one aspect. And it's an aspect of her life that I think ran through all of the various stories that David told and relates to a passage from the Tanakh that we read on Friday nights called Eshet Chayil. It is, as we recited, a tribute to women in general, wives in particular, for the strength that they bring, for the support to their spouse and to their children and to the community, all of which is certainly appropriate when speaking about Harriet. But in its more literal form, the word Eshet Chayil means a fighter, a warrior. It is this aspect that I want to focus on, because Robert Alter notes that when we talk about Eshet Chayil, we're talking about a woman of vigor, of strength, of worth, of substance, using a military term transferred to a civic life. And Harriet was indeed a fighter from the outset. It was probably born within her in the times in which she was born. November 7th, 1931, in the midst of the Great Depression in Hamden, Connecticut. Harold and Anna Feinmark brought this new baby into the world. They already had 2 children, Rita, who was born in 1923, and son Joseph, who was born in 1926. Many people living in those harsh economic times would have said, enough. We have a daughter, we have a son. That's all that we can do. And so the act of bringing a child into the world in such a time is in and of itself both an act of faith and one of resilience. And faith and resilience would come to define so much of Harriet's life, as we have heard. Harriet was a woman of very strong convictions. And she was always willing to fight for what she believed was important. It was that allowed her to head off to New York City after high school, to go into nursing, to help others. And it was that same determination, as we heard about, that took her to go beyond the traditional nursing field and training of that time to get the bachelor's from University of Connecticut. It took a strong and fighting spirit to go off as a single woman alone to a new country, to the land of Israel. And as we heard, it was during that time where she had been living in Jerusalem. As I understand the story, she had run to visit her friend at Kibbutz Tenuvah. Tenuvah is known to many of us who have spent time in Israel, especially for its dairy products. One of the leading dairy producers in the state of Israel, and appropriate to mention as we are here on Erev Shavuot, which is sort of like the high season for dairy food in Israel. It also happens to be located just a little bit north of Eilat, and as we heard, it was there that she met Jacob. She remembered it when I had spoken to her about it as a pretty rough place, that there were very few women around and a lot of leering men, and so she was naturally suspicious of Jacob's determination to marry her, but in her words, his coming up from Eilat every 2 weeks to court her finally wore her down. They were married. Their original honeymoon, actually, I understand, was postponed because of emergency dental surgery that Jacob had. And it was their makeup honeymoon then that got disrupted by the 3 a.m. knock on the door calling him into the reserves. Jacob was a scout, putting him in many dangerous situations, making it all the way to Cairo and then back. And then, as we heard, they moved up to Jerusalem to find work, to New Haven, again, willing to go on her own, even though this was a familiar place. It took, again, that fighting spirit to say, I know we can't do as we had planned in beginning our life together, but I'm going to find a way for us to move forward. And that's exactly what she did. And as we heard, moving down here to the DC community to be close to Elaine and Mika, belonging to Har Zion Agudath Achim, and then later to Temple Israel, until it merged with Beth Tikva here to become Tikvat Israel. And I believe they were quite pleased with that merger and with the opportunities that gave, especially with some of the traditional aspects of that came along with that, and providing some of the structure of minyan that was so important. They were stalwarts in that morning minyan. When I came, it was Thursday morning at 6:45, where we could always find Jacob and often Harriet along with him to make sure that there was going to be a minyan. And look out and I see many of the people who were regular part of that minion, including Harold Diamond, who played an instrumental role in starting the Daily Minion, David Gantz, who would often drive Harriet to Minion as well, Mike, so many others here, because this was such an important part of her community, and she would do what was needed. I think Morning Minion wouldn't necessarily have been her first choice of activities, but she knew it was an important piece for Jacob, and it was important for the synagogue, and so she was willing to get up early and be there along with him. David talked about just a few years after they were here that he came onto the scene, that Judaism, instilling Judaism was so important that despite the limited economics that David mentioned, they were determined and sent him to the Solomon Schechter School, which later became Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School. Shabbat and holidays were an important part of their home growing up, and they instilled that import into David, who, together with Sarah, made it an important part of their own lives. Now, Harriet and Jacob had very firm beliefs when it came to how Jewish tradition should be observed. And sometimes that fighting spirit and that determination made it a little bit difficult to adapt when others had different ideas or practices. And so with all of us, our strengths sometimes can also be the things that cause our challenges in life as well. And we witnessed today with the Nurses Honor Guard how important her career was to Harriet, how she fought for her patients, how she fought for her place to be able to stand in places where, again, it was not always easy and it wasn't always the traditional way. David mentioned that she had to take a little break in her master's around the time when he was born. That took it a little bit longer. What he didn't mention was that she also was pursuing a doctorate in the 70s. And unfortunately, that was disrupted by that diagnosis of breast cancer. It was shortly before David's bar mitzvah that she was diagnosed, and perhaps I would think that was an important part of why she chose such an aggressive treatment, is that she wanted to make sure that she would be able to be there, and she was able to fight it off and to be in remission for a long time. And then, as the circle of life sometimes happens, it was again later in 2010 when it returned, and I believe was shortly before Anna's bat mitzvah, if I have my dates correct. And she again chose to fight as the warrior that she was, with the vigor that she approached everything in life, so that she would make sure that she was there and be a part of it. She had that determination to travel that David mentioned. And despite not necessarily always having the easiest time with it, especially with the challenge of eyesight, she was a ferocious reader because she wanted to know everything and would often read 4 to 5 books going on at a time, within the course of a Shabbat even, I'm told. She pursued genealogy and went on and found the history of her family and documented that in books that the family still has today, that is able to track back the many generations in her family. So that sweet cookie, as she was known, shouldn't be mistaken for somebody who was soft. She was indeed that sweet cookie, but she also had that fierce fighter within her. And I think that that fierce fighter within her is what helped her again through these last several years and to continue fighting against the breast cancer when it returned until it came to a time where it could no longer be fought. She was a warrior. She was somebody who lived life with an incredible amount of vigor. She was somebody who would stick to her guns, even sometimes when that would have impact that may not have always been exactly what was foreseen. But she was a fighter. The words Eshet Chayil appear one other time in the Tanakh, and that happens to be in the book that we will read on Shabbat, the book of Ruth. And it is used by Boaz to describe Ruth, Ruth who came through and stuck to her mother-in-law, again, perhaps against some of her own self-interest, but with determination to do what she felt was right. And even when that involved a bit of trickery in getting her husband, Boaz, it was Boaz who termed her an Eshet Chayil, who said that you are a righteous woman, a woman who is a fighter, someone who will see forth to do what you know to be right. And I think that that was true for Harriet as well. And so we pay tribute to this Eshet Chayil, this who was a loving daughter, a loving sister to Elaine and to Mika and to Rita and to Joseph, her brother, who was provided as best as she could always for her son David, for Sarah, and then for her grandchildren, for Anna, for Avi and Talia. There for them whenever she could be, on Wednesdays, picking them up from Hebrew school together with Jacob. Harriet was a fighter. It's not always easy to be a fighter. People don't always appreciate the fighters, but we know that she did her fighting out of love and did as well as she possibly could to express and share that love with the people around her. And we will sincerely miss her very deeply here in the Tikvat Israel community, where she was such a strong, strong presence. And I know for her family as well, she will be missed. May the memory of Tzvia bat Aharon v'Nechama Etta, Harriet, Ethel, Cookie, Armoza always be remembered for a blessing. I'd like to call upon Cantor Rochelle Helsner, who will lead us in El Malei Rachamim, the memorial prayer. Following that, we will call forth the pallbearers to come forward and to escort Harriet as we will then head to Mount Lebanon Cemetery, where she will be buried next to her beloved Jacob, husband of 63 years, and where she will be laid to rest. Because of Shavuot beginning this evening, The period of Shiva is cut short. There will be afternoon opportunity later this afternoon between 3 and 5 to express your condolences and to visit with the family at their home on Meadowbrook Drive. And then there will be a mincha service at Meadowbrook Lane, Freeman Drive, right. Meadowbrook is where you turn in. The synagogue used to be on Freeman Drive, but then switched its address to Meadowbrook Lane, and always gets me mixed up which is which, even after I worked there for 8 years. On Freeman Drive, just across the street from, or code is it 8402? Is that 8405? And there will be a mincha service at 4:30 this afternoon, and then that will mark the end of the period of Shiva. So I'd ask that you please rise now as we recite Amalei Rachamim.
Hail, Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bameromim, Hamitzeh Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, B'malot kedoshim utehorim kezohar harakia mazehirim et nishmat Tzivia bat Aharon v'Chana eta shehalecha leolama b'gan Eden tehei menuchata Ana Baal harachamim Hastireha beseter knafecha leolamim v'titzror b'tzror hachayim et nishmata Adonai hu nachalata v'tanuach b'shalom al mishkava v'nomar Amen.
Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Harriet Ethel Armoza, who has gone to her eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. May she rest in peace.